Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Medici, Power, Money and Ambition in the Italian Renaissance, by Paul Strathern. Narrated by Derek Perkins. If you take a view of the princes of the Medici in a group, you will feel reverence and respect at one part of the picture and be struck with amazement and horror at the remainder. To revere and know them, you must consider their generosity, their benefactions, their policy, and their scientific institutions. To view them with horror and amazement, you need only listen to the undoubted outrages of their private lives. John Boyle, Earl of Cork and Orrery, friend of the poet Alexander Pope, and an early British resident of Florence in 1755. Prologue. High Noon. It is Sunday the 26th of April, 1478, in Florence, and the church bells ring out from the towers above the rooftops of the city. Lorenzo the Magnificent, accompanied by his circle of favourites, is making his way through the colourful crowds towards the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. The 29-year-old Lorenzo is the head of the Medici family, which, along with its allies and powerful political machine, controls the affairs of Florence beneath the veneer of republican democracy. Here, amidst the wealth and extravagance of Italy's most progressive city, the ancient, god-obsessed world of the medieval era is slowly giving way to a new self-confident humanism. The Medici Bank is by now the most successful and respected financial institution in Europe, with offices and agents in all major commercial centres from London to Venice. Even the recent loss of the lucrative papal business to their Florentine rivals, the Pazzi family, is seen only as a minor setback. The profits from the Medici Bank have made Florence one of the architectural and cultural wonders of Europe, enabling the family to commission such artists as Donatello, Botticelli, and Leonardo da Vinci. Yet, even amongst such geniuses, it is Lorenzo himself who epitomizes the new humanism of the Renaissance. Not for nothing is he popularly known as Il Magnifico. He is the Prince of Florence in all but name, and his supporters seek him as godfather to their firstborn male children. Lorenzo sees his rule as a celebration. The people are courted with festivities and carnivals. When commissioning great works of art, his taste is evident. He understands the artists he employs, encouraging them to excel in their own characteristic way, and they respect him as an equal in matters of art. He himself is an accomplished musician, athlete, and swordsman. He is also well versed in philosophy, and on the way to establishing himself as one of the finest Italian poets of his time. Yet, for all this, he prides himself on being a man of the people. His apparel is less ornate than that worn by many other Florentine notables. Indeed, apart from the aura pertaining to his implicit power, his appearance is somewhat unprepossessing. The best-known portrait of him, a painted terracotta bust by Verrocchio, depicts a surprisingly coarse-featured, frowning figure. He has the prominent Medici nose and protruding lower jaw, heavy-lidded eyes, and wide but curiously unsensual, narrow-lipped mouth. It is difficult to detect the exceptional man behind such features in repose, though doubtless, when enlivened by the power of his personality, they exuded that compelling, magnetic quality which made him so sexually attractive, and which also attracted the fond admiration of philosophers, artists, and even the people. As the bells ring out over the city, Lorenzo and his entourage reach the end of the Via Larga and move towards the cathedral square. Before them, Brunelleschi's dome rises against the sky. This dome is perhaps the finest architectural achievement of early Renaissance Europe, outspanned only by the dome of the Pantheon in Rome, which had been built more than 1,000 years previously. Only now is Europe beginning to catch up with the greatness of its past. Lorenzo and his friends enter the cool, dimmed interior of the cathedral. Back on the Via Larga, Lorenzo's younger brother, Giuliano, is hurrying to catch up with him, limping from a bout of painful sciatica. He is accompanied by Francesco de Pazzi and his friend Bernardo Bandini, and as they walk down the street, Francesco rests a comradely arm around Giuliano's shoulder, helping him to overcome his limp, assuring him there is no need to hurry. He gives Giuliano a playful squeeze, noting that he is not wearing any chainmail body armor beneath his colorful doublet. When they reach the church, Giuliano sees that his brother Lorenzo is already up by the high altar, surrounded by his friends and 2 priests, one of whom Giuliano recognizes as a tutor to the Pazzi family. The service begins, and Giuliano de Medici decides to remain by the door with Francesco de Pazzi, Bernardo Bandini, and his companions. The sung responses of the choir ring out in the high, echoing interior of the cathedral beneath the towering dome. Then the chanting voices fall silent, and the priest conducting the service prepares to celebrate High Mass. The sacristy bell tinkles above the murmuring conversations taking place amongst the informally assembled congregation, and their voices too fall silent as the priest elevates the host before the high altar. The moment the priest raises the host, 2 separate incidents take place simultaneously. By the door, Bernardo Bandini whips out a dagger, turns and plunges it into Giuliano de Medici's head with such force that Giuliano's skull is split open with a spray of blood. Next, Francesco de Pazzi begins stabbing in a frenzy at Giuliano's falling body, slashing again and again like a man possessed. Such is his mindless fury as he hurls himself forward onto the prostrate body of Giuliano that he is blinded with blood and even plunges his dagger into his own thigh. At the same moment, up at the high altar, the 2 priests standing behind Lorenzo have swiftly pulled out daggers from beneath their robes. One places a hand on Lorenzo's shoulder as he prepares to stab him in the back, but Lorenzo spins round and the tip of the descending dagger only slices through the skin of his neck. As he staggers back, he wrenches off his cloak, swirling it over his arm to form a shield, while with his other hand he rapidly draws his sword. The 2 priests retreat aghast, their daggers still raised. Immediately there is a melee of bodies around Lorenzo, with shouts and the slicing of steel as Lorenzo's attendant friends draw their swords, protecting him as he leaps over the altar rail and sprints for the safety of the open sacristy door. By now Bernardo Bandini has left Giuliano de Medici for dead, and is rushing through the congregation, his sword drawn. He attempts to cut off the fleeing Lorenzo, but Lorenzo's friend Francesco Nuri hurls himself between them, and Bandini runs him through with a single lunge, killing him instantly. Amidst the confusion another friend is wounded in the arm, and by the time Bandini can recover, Lorenzo and his friends are inside the sacristy, heaving the heavy bronze doors closed. Lorenzo claps his hand to his neck. He can feel that the blood is flowing, but it is only a surface wound. Antonio Ridolfi, who is standing beside Lorenzo, impulsively launches himself forward, grabbing Lorenzo by the shoulders, appearing to kiss him on the neck. Lorenzo is aware of his friend sucking at his wound and then spitting out the blood. The priest's dagger point may have been poisoned. Even through the bronze doors they can hear the uproar that has broken out amongst the congregation, where there is a tumult of cries and shouts. Lorenzo starts forward, exclaiming, "Giuliano, is he safe?" His friends glance at one another. No one replies. Amidst the pandemonium in the cathedral, Giuliano's assassins and the 2 priests melt away through the throng, while all kinds of rumors begin to spread amongst the crowd outside the cathedral. Some say the great dome has collapsed, and people begin running back through the streets for the safety of their homes. Others clamor to get inside the cathedral. Most cluster in bewildered groups, comforting the distressed and weeping. After a few minutes have elapsed and nothing further happens, Lorenzo's friends whisk him out through a side door of the cathedral, bundling him down the street towards the safety of the Palazzo Medici. Yet just a quarter of a mile away the other part of the plot is continuing according to plan. Archbishop Salviati, the leader of a second group of conspirators, has entered the Palazzo della Signoria, the civic palace, accompanied by fellow conspirator Jacopo Bracciolini and several of his companions. The archbishop asks to see the Gonfaloniere, the titular ruler of the city-state of Florence. He informs the attendant that he has an important message for Gonfaloniere Cesare Petrucci from Pope Sixtus IV. As the attendant mounts the stairway to the Gonfaloniere's quarters, the archbishop's retainers file silently through the front door of the palazzo. These retainers are an unlikely bunch for the retinue of an archbishop, their coarse, fearsome faces barely softened by their pretences at disguise. They are, in fact, hired mercenaries from Perugia, all fully armed. Gonfaloniere Petrucci is taking his midday meal with the members of the Signoria, his 8 elected colleagues, when the attendant comes in and delivers his message. Gonfaloniere Petrucci asks that the archbishop be shown into the main reception chamber, whilst his companions can wait in the corridor. Any further members of his retinue are to be admitted to the nearby chancellery. As Gonfaloniere Petrucci turns to complete his meal, he is faintly aware of a distant clamour beyond the window in the streets. When eventually Gonfaloniere Petrucci enters his reception chamber and takes the archbishop's hand, he notices that it is shaking. Salviati seems to be in an agitated state. As the archbishop begins delivering the pope's message, his voice breaks into a stammer so that it is barely intelligible. The blood drains from his face, and he begins glancing towards the door. When Gonfaloniere Petrucci becomes suspicious and calls for the guards, the archbishop immediately makes a dash for the door, shouting to his companions in the corridor, telling them to summon the Perugian mercenaries. But the Perugians are unable to respond. The chancellery into which they have been admitted has doors that cannot be opened from the inside, and they can be heard hammering at the wooden doors, bellowing to be let out. As soon as Gonfaloniere Petrucci emerges into the corridor, the archbishop's companion, Jacopo Bracciolini, leaps towards him, drawing his weapon, but the Gonfaloniere manages to catch him by the hair and hurls him to the ground. Grabbing the first implement he sees, the Gonfaloniere begins wielding a metal cooking spit, scattering the archbishop and his companions. By now the Perugians sound as if they are breaking out of the locked chancellery, prompting Gonfaloniere Petrucci and his colleagues to make a dash for the entrance to the tower, holding on to the heavy door as they begin frantically chaining it closed behind them. They then run up the stairs and begin tolling the bell, whose booming tones begin ringing out over the rooftops of the city, the customary warning, summoning all citizens to the Piazza della Signoria in times of emergency. Soon the anxious crowds are gathering below in the large open piazza as the bell continues to toll over the city. Suddenly, Jacopo de Pazzi, one of the leaders of the conspiracy, appears from a side street leading a column containing several scores of armed men, who begin shouting, "Popolo e libertà," the people and freedom, the customary Florentine slogan of revolt against dictatorial government. The armed men ride about the square, trying to encourage the crowd to join in, but they remain suspicious. Then, from high up in the tower, the Gonfaloniere and his attendants begin hurling down stones at Jacopo de Pazzi and his men, who quickly sense that the suspicions of the crowd are hardening into anger against them. Meanwhile, a group of several dozen armed men on horseback emerges from the side street to the north of the square, which leads from the direction of the Palazzo Medici. These are Medici supporters, who make their way through the crowd towards the Palazzo della Signoria, where they dismount, unsheathing their weapons, and make their way through the door. Once inside, they storm upstairs and set upon the Perugians, quickly butchering them with their pikes and swords. After a matter of minutes, the Medici supporters emerge from the palazzo, carrying aloft on their pikes several severed Perugian heads dripping blood. Disheartened, Jacopo de Pazzi and his men turn back, riding east out of Piazza for the safety of the Palazzo Pazzi. The entire city is in confusion, alive with rumour. There has been a conspiracy. Lorenzo has been stabbed. The Pazzi family are leading an army to invade the city. The gruesome sight of the Perugians' severed heads quickly inspires the crowd to bloodlust. In rage and fear, shouting groups begin running through the streets, seeking out members of the Pazzi family and their supporters, attacking real and imagined enemies, whilst others hurry towards the Palazzo Medici. Is Lorenzo alive or dead? Who is to lead them? Who is to save the city in its hour of danger? Lorenzo is prevailed upon to show himself on the balcony of the Palazzo Medici, where his appearance is greeted with cheers. Yet people in the crowd are alarmed, for Lorenzo's neck is bandaged and his tunic dramatically spattered with blood. Lorenzo addresses the crowd from the balcony, telling them that there has been a conspiracy mounted by the Pazzi family with the aim of overthrowing the legitimate government of the city. He assures the mass of faces below that the conspiracy has failed, and that although his brother Giuliano has been murdered by the conspirators, he himself is safe, only lightly wounded. There is no need for panic. All should remain calm. No one is to take the law into their own hands or attempt vengeance of any kind. The enemies of the city will be rooted out and dealt with by the authorities. But Lorenzo's attempt at calming the crowd has the opposite effect. Relieved that they are safe, the mob is now determined to find scapegoats, the conspirators or their friends, or any of their allies. They scatter through the city in bands, baying for blood. At the Palazzo Pazzi, Francesco de Pazzi is discovered lying in bed, recovering from the knife wound he had inadvertently inflicted on his own thigh. He is hauled naked from his bed, dragged through the streets to the Palazzo della Signoria and up the stairs to the Gonfaloniere's quarters. Here Gonfaloniere Petrucci takes charge, meting out rough justice. He orders Francesco de Pazzi to be hanged forthwith. Naked as he stands, the gore dribbling from the gashed wound in his leg, a noose is cast over Francesco de Pazzi's head. The other end of the rope is tied fast to the strong metal transom dividing one of the windows, and he is then bundled from the window. The crowd cheers and jeers at his swinging naked body, writhing in its death throes as it dangles in the air beneath the overhanging window. Next it is the turn of Archbishop Salviati, who is hauled before the Gonfaloniere, still wearing his purple robes. Then, with a halter round his neck, and his hands bound firmly behind his back by a leather strap, he too is thrown from the window. The Archbishop dangles from his noose, struggling frantically, his eyes starting from their sockets. Desperately, he tries to save himself, attempting to bite into the naked body swinging beside him as the upturned faces of the crowd howl with delight. For the next few days, mobs roam the city, taking vengeance as they see fit. The two priests who had attempted to murder Lorenzo are discovered hiding in the Badia, the Benedictine abbey close to the Palazzo Pazzi. They are immediately dragged into the street, their robes torn from their bodies, then castrated, before being hauled off to be hanged. There are many such gruesome examples of mob fury, as the victors vent their anger on the vanquished factions and old scores are settled. According to Machiavelli, writing less than half a century later in his History of Florence, there were so many deaths that the streets were filled with the parts of men. News of the failed Pazzi conspiracy soon spreads beyond Florence to Rome, where Pope Sixtus IV, who had backed the conspirators, is enraged, even more so when he learns that one of his archbishops has been publicly hanged, clad in his ecclesiastical robes. This is no less than sacrilege. A papal bull is issued excommunicating Lorenzo, who is described as the child of iniquity and the suckling of perdition. This is accompanied by an interdict forbidding the celebration of Mass in any church throughout the entire Florentine Republic. After communicating with his ally, the King of Naples, and invoking their joint treaty, the Pope then declares that Naples and the Papal States are going to war against Florence. Back in Florence, Lorenzo the Magnificent is behaving with characteristic panache. He has decided that the defeat of the Pazzi conspiracy should be celebrated in style. He lets it be known to the appropriate government authority, the Council of Eight, the Committee of Political Police and Magistracy, that he wishes there to be a permanent artistic reminder of this triumph over the conspirators. Thereupon the Council of Eight summons Sandro Botticelli, Lorenzo's favourite artist, and offers him a generous commission. For 40 golden florins he will paint, on the wall by the side façade of the Palazzo della Signoria, a large fresco commemorating the recent events. In the customary Florentine manner for dealing with disgraced or traitorous citizens, this painting will contain 8 full-length portraits of the leading Pazzi conspirators. Those who have been caught will have nooses painted around their necks indicating their punishment, whilst Bernardo Bandini, the man who first stabbed Lorenzo's brother Giuliano and managed to escape, will be depicted upside down, hanging by his foot. Under each of these portraits, Botticelli will paint the words of a short, mocking verse, which will be composed by Lorenzo himself, specially for the occasion. In the verse beneath the upside-down Bandini, he will be described as a fugitive who has not escaped the fates, for on his return a far crueler death awaits. Botticelli was approaching the height of his powers, and these portraits required all his skills. Custom dictated that they should be extremely realistic, portraying faces that were immediately recognizable to their former fellow citizens. Similarly, they should be depicted in clothes of the same color and design as those they had habitually worn about the city. Archbishop Salviati was, of course, to be shown in full purple robes. It would take Botticelli all of 12 weeks before he finally finished this work, which must have been a masterpiece of its kind. However, just 7 months later, the portrait of Archbishop Salviati would have to be obliterated, a requirement that was specifically inserted by Pope Sixtus IV into the peace treaty that was eventually negotiated between Florence and the Papal States. A few months after this, the portrait of Bandini would also have to be repainted. After the failure of the conspiracy, Bernardo Bandini had managed to escape to the coast, where he had succeeded in boarding a Venetian galley bound for Constantinople. Lorenzo was particularly keen to get his hands on the murderer of his beloved brother, Giuliano, and a diplomatic request was dispatched to the Turkish Sultan, who ordered Bandini's arrest. He was then shipped back to Florence in chains, where he was hanged. Repainting the figure of Bandini in the mural was considered no small matter, but Botticelli was unable to fulfill this task. Instead, the work was given to no less an artist than Leonardo da Vinci. In his notebooks there is a sketch of the hanging Bandini, almost certainly a preliminary drawing for the painting. There would be no further alterations to this great fresco, unique in containing work by both Botticelli and Leonardo da Vinci, which would remain on the wall by the Piazza della Signoria for all to see. Here was art as a celebration, a display of power and brilliance, which also stood as a warning to any who might contemplate opposing the Medici. It would remain in place for as long as the Medici ruled Florence. Part 1. Origins of a Dynasty. 1. Ancient Beginnings. The Medici family is said to have been descended from a knight called Averardo, who fought for Charlemagne during his conquest of Lombardy in the 8th century. According to Medici family legend, Averardo was travelling through the Mugello, a remote valley near Florence, when he heard tell of a giant who was terrorizing the neighborhood. Averardo went in search of the giant and challenged him. As they faced each other, the giant swung his mace. Averardo ducked, and the iron balls from the giant's mace smashed into his shield, but eventually Averardo managed to slay the giant. Charlemagne was so impressed when he heard of Averardo's feat that he decreed that henceforth his brave knight could use his dented shield as his personal insignia. The Medici insignia of red balls, or palle, on a field of gold is said to derive from Averardo's dented shield. Others claim that the Medici were, as their name suggests, originally apothecaries dispensing medicines to the public, and that the balls of their insignia were, in fact, pills. This story was always denied by the Medici, and their denial is supported by historical evidence, as the medical use of pills did not become commonplace until some time after the appearance of the Medici insignia. The most likely origin of their insignia is the sign that medieval money changers hung outside their shops, depicting coins. Money changing was the initial Medici family business. The legendary knight Averardo settled in the Mugello, the fertile valley of the river Sieve, which runs through the mountains 25 miles by road to the northeast of Florence. Even today, the region remains a picturesque spot with vineyards and olive groves either side of the curving river, beneath steep wooded hills and the mountains beyond. This isolated region of less than 20 square miles must have had an exceptional gene pool. Not only did it produce the multi-talented Medici, but also the families of geniuses as disparate as Fra Angelico, Galileo, and Giotto. The Medici family came from the village of Cafaggiolo, and was always to retain strong links with this spot. Sometime before the turn of the 13th century, the Medici family appears to have left Cavagiolo to try their luck in Florence. They were not the only country people to seek their fortune in Florence at around this time, and between the mid-12th and mid-13th centuries, the population of Florence is said to have increased fivefold to more than 50,000. Medieval methods of ascertaining the population were notoriously fanciful, which leaves such figures open to question. The census-taking methods of Florence were a case in point. Births were registered by the simple method of counting beans. When a child was born, the family was expected to drop a bean into the local census box, black for a boy or white for a girl. However, we know that Florence experienced an unprecedented increase in population during this period, making it larger than Rome or London, though it remained smaller than the great medieval centres of Paris, Naples, and Milan. The Medici settled in the neighbourhood of San Lorenzo, clustered about the church of San Lorenzo, the earliest part of which had been consecrated in the 4th century. As a result, San Lorenzo would become the patron saint of the Medici, and some of the family's most illustrious sons would be named after him. From San Lorenzo it was just a few minutes' walk to the Mercato Vecchio, Old Market, the hub of the city's commercial life, now the large central Piazza della Repubblica. Here visitors came from miles around to buy the cloth for which the city was famous, with bolts of brightly coloured material laid out on the trestle stalls, cut to measure against the customer as he bargained. Early in the morning the streets leading to this large square would be filled with the carts of farmers bringing their wares to market, the squeals of driven pigs, bleating sheep, the mooing of milk cows. Amidst the cries of the sellers and animals, there were stalls selling freshly caught fish from the Arno, slices from hooked slabs of bloody meat, varieties of cheeses, wine from the barrel. Along the walls were neatly stacked piles of vegetables and fruit, onions and withered greens in the spring, fennel and figs, cherries and oranges in summer, and in winter meagre piles of earthy root vegetables. Amidst the throng of townsfolk and yokels, the mendicant friars in their threadbare robes begged from passers-by. The blare of a herald's trumpet, and the crowd would throng the entrance to the Via del Corso to watch a blooded, stumbling criminal in rags and chains being whipped through the street amidst jeers, on his way to the Bargello and a public hanging on the morrow. The first Medici mentioned in the records of Florence is one Chiarissimo, who appears on a legal document dated 1201. Little is known of exactly what happened to the family during this period. All we know for certain is that the Medici became money changers and gradually prospered, to such an extent that by the end of the 13th century they had become one of the better-known business families in the city. Even so, the Medici were not regarded as one of the leading families, who were all either noble landowners or well-established merchants. Then, in 1296, Ardingo de' Medici became the first member of the family to be chosen as gonfaloniere. Florence was an independent republic, theoretically run on democratic lines. It was ruled by a 9-man council known as the Signoria, the chief of whom was the gonfaloniere, who presided for a period of 2 months. The gonfaloniere and his Signoria were selected by lottery from amongst members of the guilds. These lotteries were increasingly fixed, so that the Signoria generally represented whichever leading family or families held sway at the time. In 1299, Guccio de' Medici was the second member of the family to become gonfaloniere. Guccio must have shown his benefactors that the Medici could be relied upon, for in 1314 Averardo de' Medici became the third Medici gonfaloniere. Florence may have been lacking in power and historical greatness compared with such cities as Paris and Milan, but it soon made up for this in the creation of wealth. This was mainly due to the new growth industry of the 13th century, banking, which was to a large extent an Italian invention. The English term derives from the Italian word banco, referring to the original counters on which the bankers conducted their trade. At this time, Italy was the main economic power in Europe, with the Genoese and the Venetians controlling the import of silk and spices from the Orient. Marco Polo even records that in the last decade of the 13th century, Genoese merchant ships were trading on the Caspian Sea, and as early as 1291 2 Genoese galleys disappeared searching for a route to the Orient by way of West Africa. International trade was on the increase, despite hazardous, rutted turnpikes and shipping routes raided by pirates. The overland journey...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?